President Trump says a U.S. weapons systems officer is, quote, seriously wounded this morning after being rescued in a daring and heroic mission launched by U.S. forces inside Iran overnight. The injured airman survived being shot down behind enemy lines, CNN has learned, by hiding alone in a mountain crevice before he was rescued in a massive effort involving hundreds of American military and intelligence personnel. But if you were wondering how the success of that operation might affect the president's posture toward Iran moving forward, wonder no longer. He has just threatened Iran in extraordinary graphic terms, giving the Iranian regime just over a day to either make a deal, reopen the Strait of Hormuz, or face hell. If your children are watching, be warned, the president did not use polite language. Quote, Tuesday will be Power Plant Day and Bridge Day, all wrapped up in one in Iran. There will be nothing like it. Open the fucking strait, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. We should note that destroying civilian power infrastructure is generally considered to constitute a war crime under international law, though the president could argue that the infrastructure has dual use and also is utilized by Iran's.
Let's be real for a second. Something about this situation just doesn't sit right. And the more you look at it, the worse it gets. We got an active military conflict involving the United States and Iran. We got American service members in danger. And you would think at a basic human level, everyone in this country would be on the same page about one thing. You don't root against your own people when they're stuck behind enemy lines. But that's exactly what started happening. And we're going to get into that because it matters. First, here's what actually went down. We had 2 U.S. military crew members whose aircraft was shot down over Iranian territory. They had to eject out of the plane and landed in hostile territory. This isn't a movie. This is real life. When that happens, the clock starts ticking immediately. Every minute matters. You're dealing with an unfamiliar Terran enemy forces actively searching, and in this case, a government that does not exactly capture Americans well. So an urgent rescue operation was launched right away. Now, one of the crew members was recovered the same day, which is incredible when you think about how difficult these operations are. But the second crew member, that's where things got serious. This wasn't just some unknown situation. This was a colonel, a weapons systems officer, someone with a high level of training and responsibility, and he was injured during the ejection. Reports said he could still walk. But think about what that actually means. You're wounded. You are in enemy territory. You're trying to stay hidden. You don't know exactly where friendly forces are. And at the same time, the enemy is actively looking for you. On top of that, Iran reportedly put out a bounty for his capture. So now it's not just their military searching Iran. It's anyone who wants to cash in. That turns the entire area into a threat. Every person, every movement, every decision becomes life or death. And for more than a day, this guy is out there evading capture, trying to survive. That's the reality of it. And that's what this actually looks like. Not headlines, not politics, just a real human being trying to make it home. Now, here's where things take a turn. And honestly, this is the part that should concern people the most. While all of this is happening, while there's an American service member out there injured, hiding in the mountains, you had people online, Americans, who were not just criticizing policy, not just asking questions, but actually rooting against the outcome.
At these 2 extraordinary rescues, because it was 2, and as you probably know, we didn't talk about the first one for an hour, and then somebody leaked something, which we'll hopefully find that leaker. We're looking very hard to find that leaker, and talked about there's somebody missing. They basically said that we have one and there's somebody missing. Well, they didn't know there was somebody missing until this leaker gave the information. So whoever it was, we think we'll be able to find it out because we're going to go to the media company that released it, and we're going to say, national security, give it up or go to jail. Because we're going to go to the media company that released it, and we're going to say, national security, give it up or go to jail. And we know who, and you know who we're talking about, because some things you can't do. Because when they did that, all of a sudden, the entire country of Iran knew that there was a pilot that was somewhere on their land that was fighting for his life. And it also made it much more difficult for the pilots and for the people going in to search for him. All of a sudden, when you add that to it, but we have to find that leaker because that's a sick person. Probably didn't realize the extent of how bad it was. I can't imagine that the person did, but we're going to find out. It's national security, and the person that did the story will go to jail if he doesn't say, and that doesn't last long, and I think everybody would understand it. They put this mission at great risk. They put that man at great risk, and they put the hundreds of people that went in looking for him, because everyone now knows that we're going in.
And I call that the most treasonous anti-American thing to do. I'm pro-American, baby. And I respect whoever the American people have announced and also letting their voices be heard to make president. I respect the position of the presidential position of being a president of the United States, right? So whoever is the president, I respect it for the sake of the title of leading this country on the best interest of American. And I will always stand up for America and be pro-American. That's my point. So the simple fact, and this is just my perspective and speculation, allegedly, I'm going to put out there, this is all speculation. I'm not saying this is true. The most known mainstream liberal media to do the thing that they love to do, which is jump on the narrative, like CNN, who loves to jump on a narrative, and it's a shame how desperate they are to want to jump on a narrative so quick to be anti-Trump, to oppose everything Trump is doing for the simple fact that now you are operating in a treasonous way for the simple fact you don't even want to see the success or the greatness of America going in the right direction of this country as a whole. Take Donald Trump out of it. Okay, you may not like who's in the presidential seat, but at the end of the day, he is the president, and we respect that position because the Americans have made their voices be heard through their vote. We respect the process, right? And that was the process, and this is what pans out to be the outcome. So now, the simple fact is, you can sit there because you want to get a headline and you want to get narrative spewed because you want to be the first person to talk about something so negative and so pessimistic and so against this country that you can't even put your feelings aside to want best for the country and what you enjoy the privileges and also the beauty to have a difference of opinion, because if you were to go to Iran, you would not be alive. They will unalive you for the simple fact of you opposing their government. But the beauty of America and the beauty of the media networks, shout out to Barack Hussein Obama, who actually made this outcome and influenced the outcome policy-wise, where the mainstream liberal media is able to spew this propaganda. Because at one point, the media would have to only speak on the truth and factually the truth and only report the truth and the truth only. But now in Obama, you can look it up, tweak policy where you can spew, these mainstream liberal media outlets can spew things opposing, no matter if it's propaganda or not. They can report on America, especially in a time of war or a time, in this case, an operation is not war, negativity and propaganda. And that's dangerous. I believe the whole mainstream media landscape needs to be changed. Comment down below and let me know what you guys' thoughts about that. But that is my proof that people online, Americans, who are not just criticizing policy, not just asking questions, but actually rooting against America, the outcome, for saving a serviceman. And in my view, that's where things cross a line. Because it wasn't about strategy anymore. It wasn't about whether you agree with conflict or not. It turned into people hoping that this man would be captured, this airman, this serviceman, because they thought it would make President Trump look bad. Think about that for a second. Strip away the politics, strip away the headlines, just look at what that actually means. You're talking about hoping that an American in enemy territory gets captured by a hostile regime just so it can score political points. That's not normal. That's not healthy. And it says a lot about where we are right now as a country. And in my view, you can disagree with any president. Like I said, you can question any policy. That's part of living in a free country. But when it comes to the point where people are emotionally invested in the failure of their own military during an active operation, the same military where individuals, black, white, Asian, all legal immigrants who have spewed bloodshed for the freedoms and the luxuries on which we enjoy on a day-to-day basis here in the United States of America, I'm sorry, I can't rock with that. I can't rock with that. So to be so emotionally invested in failure during an active operation in your own military, that's something different. That's a deeper issue because now you're not just arguing about ideas, you're rooting against outcomes that involve people's lives. And that's where it doesn't add up. Especially when you think about the bigger picture. We already have real enemies overseas. That's not controversial. That's just reality. But when you start seeing this level of division at home, where even something as basic as bring our people back safely becomes politicized, it creates a completely different kind of problem. It affects how people see this country. It affects morale. It raises a serious question about unity when it actually matters. Now, here's the part that brings it all together. Despite all of that, despite the danger, despite the pressure, despite what people were saying online, the outcome did not go the way some of these voices were hoping. Both crew members were successfully rescued. Thank God. They were brought home. And when you look at that result, it should be a moment where everyone could just take a step back and say, good, that's what we wanted. Because at the end of the day, this isn't supposed to be complicated. These are Americans in harm's way. And the goal is simple: bring them home safe. That's it. But the fact that this even turned into a divided reaction tells you there's a much bigger conversation that needs to happen. And that's exactly what we're going to get into next. Hit the like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and I want you guys to check this out.
Great news overnight that the America has apparently retrieved the second aircrew that was ejected out of the F-15 that was downed over Iran. And as a former fighter pilot myself and somebody who's ejected, I have first-hand experience of what that pilot must have gone through, and particularly what the families will have felt. Just how complicated was that rescue mission? So many would imagine it's just a helicopter going in to retrieve this pilot as part of the combat search and rescue operation. In fact, far from it. It's a much more complicated operation. Not only aircraft, but also there are reports suggesting that the CIA was involved, mounting a deception operation. Why is that important? Because you want to build as much time as possible before the Iranians actually come after the aircrew on the ground, to provide the maximum amount of time for the American Special Forces and the combat search and rescue teams to identify, find and extract this pilot. Time is critical. When they finally cleared the area, when they've identified the aircrew person on the ground, he will almost certainly be lying down, face down, arms out, because he mustn't present a threat to the teams coming in. They will land a helicopter very close by. They'll treat him very roughly, grab him, pile him onto the helicopter, and then all of them will try and get out safely. Now, we do understand that the aircrew was injured, probably as a result of the ejection, but we understand he'll be okay. We also understand that there was an engagement. In other words, that there were some Iranians trying to stop this operation. These operations are not without risk. As a former fighter pilot, you operate well above the area of these risks. But when you're doing a search and rescue and a retrieval operation, you've got to get down. It's got to be low level. It probably would have been at night to try and maximize the surprise and also the covert nature, but there'll be massive relief. I know when a former colleague of mine was shot down, there's grave worry, particularly with your colleagues. You're part of a close-knit family on the squadron. We haven't been talking about the name of the pilot. We just haven't known. They will have known, and so will the families of the people involved. And it will have been very harrowing times. Are they okay? Have they survived? Are they badly injured? Worse still, if they were managed to be captured. It'll be a massive relief for the families and their military colleagues that this successful operation was conducted and they're all safely out of Iran.
This story of us rescuing this airman is nothing short of incredible. And what the United States military is able to pull off, I mean, it's just amazing. So,
we're the only ones.
I mean, to say that we're thankful for this military operation this morning, it doesn't even capture how
Great.
Yeah, so you saw that, you heard that, and let's just call it what it is. That's a good story to wake up to, especially on a day like Easter. No man left behind. That's not just a slogan. That's something you actually saw play out in real time. We went in, we got our people, we brought them home safe. That's the outcome. And in my view, that's something everybody should be able to agree on and appreciate, no matter where you stand politically. Because when you really break it down, this isn't abstract. This is somebody's family member. This is somebody who signed up to serve, ended up in the worst possible situation, and still made it back because of the people around him and the system backing him up. And that's why I think it's worth slowing down and actually looking at what happened here. Because this wasn't just luck. This was competence. This was planning. This was execution at a very high level. From my perspective, you're seeing leadership that knows what it's doing. You got the Pentagon running operations. You got intelligence agencies working in sync. And it all came together under pressure. And one of the most interesting parts of this whole thing is what was happening behind the scenes. This wasn't just boots on the ground searching through mountains hoping to get lucky. There was a deception campaign going on at the same time. Reports are saying that intelligence operatives were circulating information inside Iran, making it seem like both crew members had already been recovered. Think about that for a second. While Iran is actively searching for this missing officer, they are being fed information that the mission is already over. That creates confusion. That slows them down. That deters the enemy, right? That buys time so we can rescue our servicemen. The second serviceman that we need to rescue, right? Because we rescued the first one. And time is everything in a situation like this. So while they're trying to figure out what's real and what's not, our people are moving, searching, coordinating, and eventually making that recovery. That's not random. That's strategy. That's coordination between military operations and intelligence operations working together in real time. And when you zoom out a little bit, it tells you something bigger about capability, because this wasn't a small operation. Now you're talking about special operation forces going deep into hostile territory, operating in mountainous terrain over multiple days with aircraft, personnel, and constant risk. You're talking about maintaining enough control in the air and enough intelligence on the ground to not only locate someone, but extract them safely while the enemy is actively looking for you. That's a very high bar, if you ask me, and they cleared it. And the standard is the standard with this administration. No man left behind. And you got to love that, right? You have to love that. How can you be against that as an American? They even destroyed their own aircraft, the United States, to make sure nothing sensitive fell into the wrong hands when it came to the Iranian regime. Again, think about what that actually means in real life. That's a level of discipline and planning that most people don't see, because you usually only hear about it when something goes wrong. Here, it went right. Now, from my perspective, this also shows something else. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a demonstration. Rather intentional or not, it showed what the United States is capable of doing inside Iranian territory. And that matters when you start talking about the bigger picture, especially when it comes to ongoing tensions and negotiations. Because when leadership is trying to pressure another country into making a deal, it's not just about words, it's about credibility. It's about whether the other side believes you can actually do what you're saying. And operations like this send a message without having to spell everything out. It shows reach. It shows coordination. It shows that if necessary, the U.S. can operate in places that are supposed to be off limits. Now, to be clear, any larger mission, anything involving strategic targets or or major objectives would be far more complex. No question about that. But the building blocks you saw here: intelligence, insertion, coordination, extraction under pressure. Those are real capabilities. And in my view, that's part of the signal being sent. At the same time, you also got messaging coming directly from leadership that's a lot more blunt. The president put out a statement, as you guys see on the screen here. As it reads, Trump, Tuesday will be power plant day and bridge day, all wrapped in one. In Iran, there will be nothing like it. Open the effing straight, you crazy B words, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. Tuesday, like you guys seen it. I'm not gonna repeat it, but you guys get what I'm saying. So, a blunt statement. The president put out a statement that definitely got a lot of people's attention. And yeah, it was strong language, no question. But when you strip it down to what it actually means, it's a warning. It's saying there's still an opportunity to de-escalate. There's still a chance to make a deal. But if that doesn't happen, things are going to escalate. And that's how pressure works in international conflict. That's how pressure works. It's not always polished. It's not always diplomatic in tone. Sometimes it's direct on purpose, because the goal is to make sure the message is understood clearly. Now, I get it. Some people hear that and they're uncomfortable with it. That's fair. Nobody wants escalation. Nobody wants conflict to get worse. But from my perspective, the alternative, sending weak or unclear signals, can create its own set of problems, because if the other side thinks you're not serious, they're more likely to keep pushing. So What you're seeing right now is a mix of action and messaging. You got a successful operation that proves capability, and you got strong language that reinforces intent. And when you put those two things together, the goal is pretty straightforward. Apply enough pressure to force a decision. Either come to the table and make a deal or deal with consequences of not doing that. And that's where things stand right now. Whether people like it or not, that's the reality of how these situations tend to play out in the real world, right? So now let's talk about the reaction, because this is where things usually go off rails. And before I get to that, I want to show you guys this.
Yeah, guys, good morning. I just spoke with President Trump for 15 minutes. He gave me some new details on the negotiations behind the scenes with the Iranians and what's going to happen if Iran does not make a good faith deal. The president tells me if they don't make a deal and fast, I'm considering blowing everything up and taking over the oil. The president went on to say you're going to see bridges and power plants dropping all over their country. Now, I asked him about the possibility of an agreement with the Iranians. He says those who are negotiating on behalf of Iran have been granted amnesty at this time so they can continue the talks. And the president tells me he thinks he'll be able to get a deal by tomorrow. He says, I think there's a good chance tomorrow. They're negotiating now. All of this following the president's post on True Social, where he talked about these negotiations with the Iranians. We'll pull this up. He says, quote, Tuesday will be power plant day and bridge day, all wrapped up in one. In Iran, there will be nothing like it. Open the effing straight, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. Praise be to Allah. The president posting there on True Social about this ongoing operation and his new red line for the Iranian regime. Now, the president also provided new details on what happened earlier this year as the Iranian regime took to the streets and slaughtered what the president tells me is 45,000 civilians in their own country. After that took place, President Trump told me the United States sent guns to the Iranian protesters. He tells me we sent them a lot of guns. We sent them through the Kurds, and the president says he thinks the Kurds kept them. He went on to say we sent guns to the protesters, a lot of them. And so a number of headlines here from my conversation with President Trump. All of this taking place more than a month into Operation Epic Fury and in the aftermath of that successful U.S. operation overnight to rescue that stranded U.S. service member inside Iranian territory. The president himself ordering that operation after the CIA came on Saturday morning and confirmed that they located where this crew member of an F-15 that was shot down on Friday was located. Again, the president making that decision to send in hundreds of U.S. special forces deep into Iranian territory and successfully retrieving that U.S. serviceman.
Every time something like this happens, you already know what's coming next. Certain voices in the media and in politics are going to say the response is too aggressive, too risky, maybe even dangerous, right? You'll hear talk about escalation. You'll hear concerns about how this could spiral. And in some cases, you'll even hear people questioning the judgment behind strong messaging or military action. And to be fair, let's acknowledge this part honestly. There is always a real concern when tensions rise between countries, especially when you're dealing with a place like Iran. Nobody serious wants unnecessary conflict. Nobody wants to see things go further than they have to. That's a valid concern, and it should be part of the conversation. But here is where, in my view, things start to get disconnected from reality. There's a difference between being cautious and being ineffective. There's a difference between wanting peace and signaling weakness. And this is where it helps to zoom out and look at the bigger picture, not just the headline or the latest quote. Think about how the United States has historically approached situations like this. The Constitution gives the federal government the responsibility to provide for the national defense. That's not optional. That's one of the core functions of the country. When the founders were putting this system together, they understood something very simple. If you can't protect your people, everything else falls apart. Your rights don't mean much if your country can't defend itself or its citizens. So from the beginning, there has been an understanding that strength, used correctly, is part of maintaining peace, not the opposite of it. And you can see that idea play out over time. Whether you're looking at deterrence during the Cold War or more targeted operations in the years since, the basic principle is the same. You make it clear that there are consequences for certain actions. And ideally, that clarity prevents things from getting worse. Now, bring that back to what we're seeing here. You got a situation where American personnel or in danger. You got a successful operation to bring them home. And you got leadership sending a very direct message about what happens next if tensions continue to rise. Some people look at that and see recklessness. From my perspective, what it looks like is an attempt to establish boundaries clearly before things escalate further. Because here's what this looks like in real life. If the United States responds in a weak or uncertain way, that doesn't just stay on paper. That affects how other countries act. It affects how far they're willing to push. See how the United States goes, the rest of the world goes. It affects whether they think, and I'm talking about other countries, there's any real consequences for crossing certain lines. And that's not just about one region. That has ripple effects everywhere. On the other hand, when there's a clear response, when actions match words, it changes the calculation. It forces the other side to think twice. Now, does that guarantee a peaceful outcome? No. Nothing guarantees that. But it does change the dynamics, and that's the part that often gets lost in the debate. It's not about winning conflict. It's about preventing a worse situation by being clear and credible early on. And at the same time, I think it's important to keep the focus where it belongs, on the people and the outcomes, not just the politics. Because it's easy to get caught up in narratives and arguments, but at the end of the day, this started with American service members in danger. That's the reality. And the system did what it's supposed to. It brought them home. That's something that should matter regardless who is in office or regardless of whoever says anything politically. And when you look at the broader situation, it's also about making sure that future scenarios don't put more people in that same position. That's where policy, strategy, and yes, even messaging all connect. So while there's going to be a lot of noise around this, different takes, different reactions, different political angles, in my view, the more useful way to look at this is through results and responsibility. I want you guys to check out what MS Noun had to say, formerly known as MSNBC.
I want to go back to the president's tweet here. Open the fucking straight, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell.
I'm going to rewind that.
Political magazine on Kush Credore. Laura Brown Lopez is also back with us on Kush. I want to go back to the president's tweet here. Open the fucking straight, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. Praise be to Allah. President Donald J. Trump. That is a quote from the president. So yes, we are saying it on television.
Parental warning.
I have been stuck on, so much so that we're doing a segment on it on the 9 o'clock, that what the president and this administration has been saying for at least the last week, that they actually did knock down a bridge that they said the military was using, but that civilians used. They said that they're going to take out all of the power plants. The president said Tuesday will be power plant day. That would be considered a war crime. These that the president is saying sound like, to me, and a lot of experts, war crimes. And then you have the president with this new Truth Social today.
All right. Did the operation succeed? Yes. Were lives protected? Yes. Is there a clear effort to prevent further escalation while still maintaining strength? That's what it looks like from here. And that's the balance that always been at the center of how this country approaches situations like this, right? If people agree on the details or not. Now, let's talk about this whole war crimes argument that you heard him just say, because you're going to hear that phrase thrown around a lot. In my view, a lot of people using it aren't really explaining what they mean or how these situations actually work. Let's break this down in plain English. War is not clean. It's not predictable. And it's definitely not something where every decision fits neatly into a simple good or bad box. That's just reality. At the same time, there are laws of armed conflict. There are rules about what is allowed and what isn't, and that those do matter. They exist for a reason. So I want to be clear about that up front. But here's where things start to get more complicated in the real world. When you're dealing with a country that is actively hostile, that has supported actions leading to American casualties, and that refuses to de-escalate or come to the table, the range of options gets very serious very quickly. And what leadership is trying to do in moments like this is prevent a longer, more destructive conflict. That's the goal.
It's very difficult for me to process this moment. I mean, this is a very unprecedented statement. We have the president of the United States basically declaring his intent to commit war crimes, right? You've accurately described the law. You're not supposed to be targeting civilian infrastructure. even in countries that you are nominally at war with. And this is just a further escalation of the Trump administration's sort of lack of interest in domestic international law, right? It started with the boat strikes off the in the international waters off the central, right? Then we got the deposing of the Venezuelan president. We had the war in Iran, and now this, which is disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful, coming from our U.S. president. And the language is disgraceful. The claims are disgraceful. This is, this is a historically terrible communication. This is the sort of thing, I hate to say it, that you would expect to be introduced in a war crimes tribunal in the future.
Yeah. Actually, I just want to weigh in quickly because David Rode, who was just on with us, sent one of our producers his reaction to this tweet, and it's very insightful. This will offend Iran's hardline jihadist leaders. It doesn't frighten them. Bullying religious extremists who want to become martyrs doesn't work. He says he's witnessed this in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Just to we also want to make a clarification. 1 p.m., the press conference will be tomorrow with military leaders in the Oval Office.
With the president. Laura, I know we're supposed to be talking about who the next attorney general is going to be, but this right here from the president of the United States, were it anyone else, we would be talking about the 25th Amendment. People in Congress would be raising hell. And why do I get the feeling that neither one of those things is going to happen? I know this is just breaking, so you haven't even had a chance to work your sources here. But when the president does stuff like this, incendiary things like this, is there any behind-the-scenes panic from his staff that what he's doing is really undermining his presidency, but also America's standing in the world? Any kind of panic.
And safety.
There's some panic. I mean, there White House staff who have worked for President Trump, whether it's during the first administration or now, will acknowledge that half the time, probably more than half the time, they are reacting to what he is doing. They are learning about what he is doing when he does it, when he posts it on True Social, when he says something different in a press conference, when he goes off the cuff on speeches. That is him deciding. You can see it play out when reporters are asking him questions about the war as well, that he is sometimes just deciding in that moment what he wants to say or what he wants to pursue. Now, to your point, yes, I think that your assessment is right. Are we going to see Republicans running out saying this is
unacceptable,
frightening, and that we actually should support a war powers vote? No, you're not going to see that, because there are plenty of Republicans who have also encouraged the president to take more aggressive action, namely someone like Lindsey Graham.
President, you called yesterday in your Truth Social, you called the Iranians crazy bastards.
True.
What is your response to critics who say that...
I don't care about critics.
What is your response to critics who say that it is your mental health that should perhaps be examined as this war continues?
I haven't heard that. But if that's the case, you're going to have more people like me, because our country was being ripped off on trade, on everything, for many years until I came along. So if that's the case, you're going to have more people. Dasha, go ahead.
There you have it, BS now. So for the individuals that you seen in the past, just a second ago, I played the clip and they were saying the 25th Amendment. And this is unacceptable from a sitting president to be saying things like this. And we should be worried and things like that. And how could he call them bastards and things like that? Well, there go the Trump response. I think he tells you straight up, I don't care about the critics. He's basically saying the United States of America is closed for shop. We are not getting taken advantage of anymore. It's not fair that we control the global mass market. China can be over here to ship their goods, but we can't ship our product over there. They basically get enriched off of our country and then try to overthrow our country. And then, in his words, how can you sit there and negotiate with lunatics for the simple fact is they're sitting there saying death to America and they want to overthrow America and they still acting like they want to negotiate? At first, President Trump said, we thought we had a deal, until J.D. Vance called us up and said, we think they broke the deal. They are not willing to negotiate. Okay? And the simple fact is, not only did they not want to negotiate the Iranian people. They're doubling down for the simple fact that they don't care. They're willing to die on this hill for the simple fact is they want to overthrow America and they never will work with America and they don't want no peace. Now, if you don't believe me, I'll show you guys. I want you guys to check this out.
فردا در اطراف نیروگاه‌های برق کشور زنجیره انسانی جوانان تشکیل می شود. علیرضا رحیمی دبیر شورای عالی جوانان و نوجوانان کشور در پی پیشنهاد جوانان خلاق و فعالان گروه‌های مردمی از جوانان و چهره‌های فرهنگی، هنری و ورزشی دعوت کرد برای تشکیل زنجیره انسانی در اطراف نیروگاه‌های برق کشور در ساعت 14 حضور پیدا کنند.
There you have it, family. So the Iranian regime are doubling down. Tuesday is supposed to be, as you guys seen Donald Trump's statement I showed earlier in this video, Power Plant Tuesday. So the Iranian regime obviously didn't want peace because they're willing to put innocent children in danger, Iranian children, to basically shield and form a human shield around the power plants. So then if Donald Trump decides to destroy their infrastructure, let alone the power plants, they could say how insensitive, how unsympathetic, and how unhumane and how lunatic crazy minded Donald Trump is. And they're basically playing politics, and Donald Trump is not bull crapping around, in his words. And if you don't believe me, because I'm breaking this whole thing down, give this video a big thumbs up if you got this far. Check this out.
That's one thing that's a little different than other things. We can bomb the hell out of them. We can knock them out for a loop. But to close the strait, all you need is one terrorist that somehow has a truck loaded with, because you can carry them in trucks, large trucks, a water mine, drop them in the water, and now you tell people that own ships that cost $1 billion to don't worry about the mine. You can do that even just by saying we put mines in the water. So it's not like the rest. We can knock out their military. We already have. We've knocked out their Navy. We've knocked out their Air Force completely. We've knocked out 158 ships in 3 days. We've knocked out even their mine droppers. They don't have any mine droppers anymore, but they put them on other boats, and they could drop them. I'm not even sure they have any mines there, by the way. I'm not sure. I'm personally, they say there might be 8. I don't know. I think there might be none. Because they're very good bullshit artists. That's why for 47 years they've been bullshitting other presidents, and they haven't done the job.
They're BSing artists. You guys heard it. Donald Trump ain't playing games while they trying to play politics and putting innocent kids, pure children, Iranian or not, children are children. You don't play when it comes to the children. In harm's way for the simple fact of not wanting to negotiate peace. How do you negotiate with something like that? How do you negotiate with people like that, family? And the simple fact is, remember that Iranian school that supposedly, we don't know or not if, we mistakenly bombed up the school full of Iranian children, a girls' school, whatever the case may be. And Donald Trump said, look, if we did, I'm sure it was a mistake, but I don't believe we did or not. But if we did, we didn't even do it on purpose. So they're feeding into the narrative that Trump is insensitive and he wants to basically go after regular individuals and Iranian constituents, and he's harmful, and this is a cruel individual. And CNN constantly playing the negativity part. Mind you, CNN got let into Iran within the middle of an operation going on right now. They are reporting in Iran out of all places. If that ain't the most anti-American treasonous things. So it make you wonder, speculation-wise, with Iran controlling their media, controlling their internet, they only allow what they want to allow out, be put in the media because it's a dictator regime. Why is Iran working with CNN and allowing them to come in their region? Are they playing political games and political politics along with CNN to oppose Trump, to stir up narratives because they want to oppose Trump so bad? They just hate Trump. Trump derangement syndrome is so bad that they're willing to withgo and be treasonous and anti-American acts to partner with a regime and sit there and call for peace and call for protection of a regime over the American people. They said that regime said death to America too, that they were forming nuclear bombs to overthrow us. Makes you wonder. I'm just speculating. Let me know, family. Doesn't it seem like it's coming together? Don't it just seem like something CNN would do, or CNN would influence the Iranian regime to do in regards of playing political games and narratives? Let me know. This is all speculation. I'm not saying it's true. As far as CNN reporting in Iran, that is true. I did a video on that. You guys should go check it out. But you can see the pattern over and over again, whether you're talking about Iran, Afghanistan, or other conflicts where things stretched out for years with no clear end. So from my perspective, when you hear strong language, like nothing is off the table, what that really is about is leverage. It's about making it clear that if the situation keeps escalating, the response will escalate too. Not because anyone wants that outcome, but because the alternative, drawing hard limits too early, can sometimes encourage the other side to keep pushing. Think about it in a simpler, real world way. If one side believes there are lines you will never cross no matter what, they may take more risk, BSing around, like Donald Trump said, because they don't think there will be serious consequences. That's how conflicts stretch out and get worse. Now, that doesn't mean anything goes. It doesn't mean there are no boundaries, but it does mean that decisions in wartime or in the operation in this case are often about choosing between difficult options, not perfect ones. And history shows that clearly. People still debate decisions made during World War II, including actions taken to bring that conflict to an end. Those were not easy decisions. They were made in a context where leaders were weighing how to stop a war that was costing massive numbers of lives. You can agree or disagree with those decisions, but the point is they were driven by the reality of the moment, not by the comfort of hindsight. And that's the part that often gets missed in modern conversations. It's easy to judge from a distance. It's harder to deal with the pressure of making decisions where lives are on the line right now. So when you look at the current situation, I think the more grounded way to approach it is this: what leads to fewer lives lost overall, and what actually brings the situation to a resolution. Because at the end of the day, that's what matters. Not the slogans, not the headlines, but the outcome. From my perspective, strong positioning both in action and in messaging is meant to shorten conflict, not expand it. It's meant to make the consequences clear enough that the other side chooses to step back before things get worse. And whether people agree with that approach or not, that's the logic behind it. Now, we'll see how it plays out, because at this point, the message has been sent, the capabilities have been demonstrated, and the next move depends on how Iran responds. I showed you how they responded with the human shield, and that's really what this come down to going forward, right? Because if you take it a step further, this is where the conversation gets even more real and honestly a little uncomfortable for people. You hear arguments like, well, if something is being used by the military, then it becomes a target. And in plain terms, that's generally how warfare is viewed. If something is actively supporting military operations, it's no longer just sitting on the sidelines. That's the reality. That's the reality of how these situations are analyzed. But here's where it gets more complicated. And this is the part people don't always want to deal with. Not every adversary thinks the same way. Not every leadership group responds to pressure the same way. In my view, that's what makes a situation like Iran different from other countries people like to compare it to. Think about it in simple terms. There are some governments around the world where the people in charge clearly want to stay in power, enjoy their position, and avoid anything that puts their personal safety at risk. So when pressure gets applied, economic pressure, military pressure, political pressure, they eventually respond because they have something to lose. That's the key point. They are calculating risk in a very practical, self-preserving way. Now compare that to a situation where the leadership may be driven by ideology in a much deeper way, where long-term goals or beliefs outweigh short-term consequences. That changes the equation, because now the usual pressure tactics don't always land the same way. What would normally deter one government might not deter another. And that's where people start saying, okay, what actually works here? Because if standard deterrence isn't as effective, then the strategy has to adjust. That doesn't automatically mean escalation is the answer, but it does mean you can't assume the same playbook will get the same results. And this is where things get very real in terms of decision making. From my perspective, when people say it is what it is, what they're really pointing to is the limits of ideal scenarios. Everyone would prefer a clean, simple solution where pressure is applied, the other side backs down, and the situation ends quickly. That's the best case outcome. But not every situation follows that script. Sometimes the other side digs in, as we're seeing with Iran. Sometimes they call it a bluff. And then leadership has to decide, do you keep applying pressure? Do you change strategies, or do you accept a longer, more drawn out situation? And none of those options are perfect. That's the honest truth. So when people talk about giving them what they want, I think it's important to slow that down and really ask, what does that actually mean in practice? Does it mean removing pressure completely? Does it mean making concessions? Does it mean trying a different approach altogether? Because every one of those choices comes with trade-offs, and those trade-offs don't just stay overseas. They affect stability, security, and future decisions down the line. So in my view, this is where the conversation needs to stay grounded, not in slogans, not in emotional reactions, but in outcomes. What approach actually leads to a safer situation? What approach prevents this from dragging on longer than it has to? What approach protects American lives going forward? because at the end of the day, that's the standard of all of this gets measured against. And right now, we're watching those questions play out in real time with real consequences depending on what happens next. So you already seen the full blown meltdown from MS Now, BS Now, formerly known as MSNBC, right? The focus immediately shifts to tone. Oh, the president is saying mean things to Iran. This is terrible. And look, let's be real for a second. Strong language in international conflict is not new. It's not unusual. It's actually pretty common when tensions are high, but here's where it doesn't add up for a lot of people watching this. Think about how often we heard hostile rhetoric coming from Iran over the years. Like I said, phrases like death to America. That's not subtle. That's not polite. That's direct hostility. And yet, you don't see the same level of outrage or concern about global reputation when that's happening. So when the reaction suddenly becomes hyper focused on how the United States responds verbally, people start asking questions. They start wondering why the standard seems to shift depending on who's speaking. From my perspective, that's why this debate feels off when it came to that MS Now clip, right? To a lot of everyday people, it feels off. It feels inconsistent. Now, stepping back from the noise, I think the more grounded approach here is simple. Wait and see how it plays out. Because right now we're in the middle of something, not the end of it. We don't know exactly how these negotiations are going to go. We don't know where the lines are ultimately going to be drawn. And in situations like this, outcomes matter more than headlines. Personally, I think there's a real chance this escalates before it de-escalates. Not because that's preferred outcome, but because in conflicts like this, leadership usually looks for a clear point where they can say, this is resolved. Some kind of defined result. And until that happens, the pressure tends to stay on. At the same time, it's important to keep this grounded in reality. Iran has shown that it has some capability that's obvious when it shot down the F-250, the fighter jet, well, the air servicemen, the airmen, the 2 airmen that we just saved, the one that we saved on Easter, the second one. So clearly they have some capability that's obvious. You don't have an incident like a shoot down without acknowledging that. But there's a difference between having some capability and having overall dominance. And from what this looks like right now, the United States still holds the advantage, especially when it comes to air power and operational reach. And you can see that in operations are being conducted. And how operations are being conducted, how long aircraft have been able to operate, and how these missions are being carried out. That doesn't mean there's no risk. There's always risk. But it does mean the situation is not as evenly matched as some people try to make it sound. And this is another area where things get a little distorted in the conversation. You got voices online and in politics amplifying worst case scenarios or framing things in a way that doesn't match what we're actually seeing play out. That adds to the confusion. That adds to the tension back home. Because in my view, a lot of the pressure around the situation isn't just coming from overseas. It's coming from the inside. It's coming from inside the country. It's coming from political disagreements, media narratives, economic concerns like energy prices, and general uncertainty about where this all is headed. That's real. That's part of the equation too. And then you got the bigger strategic question. What happens if negotiations fail? What happens if there's no agreement, no de-escalation, no off-ramp? That's where things get serious. And that's where people start looking at what options are actually on the table. Now, obviously, any major operation would be complex and carry real consequences. Nobody should pretend otherwise. But what we already seen is these rescue operations, the coordination, the intelligence support. It shows a level of capability that plays into those larger conversations. It shows what can be done, not just what can be said. And that's why, from my perspective, there's a sense that this situation could move in a more aggressive direction if there's no resolution. But again, we don't know yet. That's why I'm coming back to being cautiously optimistic, because at the end of the day, the goal should be a resolution that protects American lives and brings stability, not chaos. And here's the part that I think really matters. Regardless of where you stand politically, you don't have to agree with every decision. You don't have to like every move that's being made. That's part of living in a free country. But once we're in a situation like this, once Americans are involved and operations are underway, it shouldn't be controversial to say you want a successful outcome for your country. That's not about politics. That's about reality. Because the alternative isn't neutral. The alternative has consequences for real people. So in my view, you could debate the strategy. You could question the decisions. But at a basic level, wanting your country to succeed in protecting its people shouldn't be a complicated idea. It really shouldn't. But that's where we are right now. So we'll see how this plays out. We'll see what decisions get made. We'll see where it ends up. Until then, let me know what you guys think. God bless America. We pray for our country, United States of America. We pray for our president, those, the worldly leaders that's in control, that's in power, and let the good be done, right? Let the good be done in the sense of making sure all things come for a better outcome for all of us in peace, right? We pray for that. We hope for that. We intend for that. Catch you in the next one, family. Peace.